Welcome to Public Speaking with Peter George. Do you want to be calm, confident, and credible every time you speak in public? Then stay tuned as Peter and his guests discuss public speaking tips, techniques, and tactics that help you increase your impact, influence, and income. Here's your host, the author of The Captivating Public Speaker, Peter George.
Today's episode has a wide variety of concepts that are sure to further help you develop at least one of your speaking skills. But I'd be willing to bet that you'll find several ideas that'll benefit you. Today's guest, Brenden Kumarasamy, helps you with juggling just a few balls instead of the many you might be trying to keep in the air. He also helps you up your game when it comes to online presentations, as well as presenting in a second language. Brenden is the founder of Master Talk. He coaches ambitious executives and entrepreneurs to become top 1% communicators in their industries. He also has a popular YouTube channel called Master Talk, with the goal of providing free access to communication tools for everyone in the world. Here's my conversation with Brenden Kumarasamy. Hi, Brenden. Welcome to the show.
Peter, the pleasure is absolutely mine. Thanks for having me.
Brenden, to get started, please tell us a little bit about yourself and where the idea of Master Talk came from.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Brenden. I'm the founder of Master Talk. It's a YouTube channel and a coaching practice I started to help the world master the art of communication and public speaking, Peter. But how I got started was a little bit different. So when I was in college, I went to business school and I did these things called case competitions. Think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. So while other guys my age are playing rugby or baseball or basketball, I wasn't one of those guys. So I did presentations competitively. And that's how I learned how to speak. But then as I got older, Peter, I started coaching a lot of the students on how to communicate ideas so they'd win these competitions. And I accidentally got really good at communication coaching. So I just started making YouTube videos on the topic because I felt that information wasn't available for free for people. And here we are a few years later.
So you've had, in your relatively young age, at least to me, you've had a lot of experience in public speaking. Why do you believe so many people struggle with public speaking?
You know what's fascinating about this answer, Peter, this question rather, everyone has a different answer. So I'll give you my take on it. The reason I believe most of us are scared of communication is because the education system has conditioned us to believe that communication is a chore. So let's think about this. Where do we learn how to communicate in a formal setting, Peter? The answer for almost all of us is school, elementary school, high school, and the list goes on. But the problem with all of those presentations is three things. Number one, all of them are mandatory. We don't wake up one morning and say, hey, Peter, you want to get breakfast and present all day? Nobody says that. That's challenge number one. Challenge number two is all of those presentations, you're never presenting something you really care about, that you're passionate about. So it's never, what are you passionate about, Peter? Are you passionate about guitars, music, speaking? No, you got to talk about Shakespeare and poetry. And then after that, you got to talk about the history of Missouri. And you're like, I don't live in Missouri, but you got to give that presentation. And then finally, number three, all of those presentations, which is crazy if you think about it, are all tied to a punishment. So if you don't do a great job, you get punished for it. So what's the conclusion? We grow up believing that communication is a chore and no one wants to get better at doing the dishes.
I was thrilled when you said that because I've been saying that for years. We're in third grade and they say, come up and present in front of the class. They don't tell us how to do it. They just have us do it. And then we get embarrassed. And we remember that's the experience of speaking in front of others, struggling and being embarrassed. So with that in mind, how can we get over that?
You know, for me, Peter, the one thing that we don't do enough in this industry that I always like to advocate for is dreaming about our communication skills. We dream about the businesses that we want to run, the careers we want to have, the watches we want to buy, the houses we want to get, the vacations we want to go on. When was the last time we dreamed about a life in which we're a better communicator in it? So the best way to negate this effect is to start by asking yourselves this question. How would your life change if you were an exceptional communicator? How would the world change? Because we need to realize, I'm sure you mentioned probably on every episode of this podcast, Peter, that wait a second, communication is not a chore. It's the way that we raise our children. It's the way that we talk to our families. It's the way that we get the next sale in our business, the way that we make new friends. And once we realize that communication is about leading a more fulfilling life, we'll take it more seriously.
As Warren Buffett says, the greatest investment you can make is in yourself. And he put a lot of effort into his public speaking over the years. And he's done okay.
He's done all right.
So if my listeners could stop practicing one thing tomorrow, if not today, what would that one thing be?
So let me start with the context. The way that I view communication, it's like juggling 18 balls at the same time. One of those balls is body language, one of them is storytelling, one of them is facial expressions, vocal tone variety, and the list goes on. So it can get really confusing for people who are just getting started. So in my work, what I've always thought about is what are the 3 easiest balls to juggle? And within that, I call that my easy 3. So let's start with the first one, since you mentioned the one thing, which in my case would be the random word exercise. Pick a random word, like a trophy, like a birthday, like light bulb, and create random presentations out of thin air. And the reason this is effective is for 2 reasons. One, it allows you to practice out of thin air. There's no preparation, so it's more impromptu. And the second reason that I teach people is if you can make sense out of nonsense, you can make sense out of anything. And the last piece to this, it's also really easy to do. You don't have to think about a question or a prompt. You're literally just walking through life and just going light bulb, and you create a presentation. So there's more bias for action.
One of the things my clients say all the time is, wow, there's so many things to think about. You're juggling all the balls, hits home. Let's switch this up a little. We know that presenting online is not going away. It's going to be here for a long time till there's another technology to replace it. How can we present more effectively when we're delivering talks online?
So when I think about online, there's a couple of differences that come to mind. Let's mention the first 3. The first one is eye contact. So when we think about an in-person presentation, we generally want to move our body to look at the different people in the room and move our face to look at them directly in the eye. Whereas what's nice about online is whether you're speaking to 1 or 10,000 people, you only have to look in one direction, which is the direction I'm looking at right now, which is just the camera lens. And you give the illusion that you're looking at everyone at the same time. So that'll be the first piece. You could put a post-it note next to the lens. You could put a picture of your family. You can have a nice arrow that says, look here or else. You just pick what you like as long as you look at the lens. That's 1. 2 is accessibility. So when we're in person, it's very easy to talk to our audience and get feedback because there's very little friction. They're right in front of you. Hey, Peter, can you give me some feedback on my presentation? You're right there. We get lunch. Give me some feedback. Online, very difficult because there's a lot more friction. The call just ends. So you need to force those interactions. You need to get on calls with people and actually feel their energy that way, especially if you're just getting started with online, so you can build that energy across. That's 2. And then finally, number 3 is energy. At the end of the day, Peter, and I'm sure you know this as well as I do, it's very difficult to give the same level of energy online than in person for the simple reason of accountability. When you're in person, you have to shower. You have to get up in the morning. You have to get dressed because you're high-fiving people, you're hugging them, they're shaking their hand, and you have to show up because you're right in front of them. Whereas online, you can get away with a lot of things, so that same level of accountability isn't there. Meaning, get better in person. That's the strategy so that you get better online.
Getting feedback. Do you think everybody wants feedback on their talk?
I believe that the people who want to be world-class will definitely seek that feedback, and the people who don't want to aspire for more probably won't. And that's really the difference. But the other piece that I'll add as a value here is the type of feedback that we're getting. I feel there's 2 parts to this. One is people don't ask for feedback, for sure. And then even the people who do, they don't ask it in the right way. So let me give you an example that I got from Kevin Systrom, the founder of Instagram, and I love his question. I use it all the time. And the question is simply this: if you had to remove one part of my speech, what would you remove and why? What's nice about how the question is framed, Peter, is it forces a point of improvement. Because a lot of people just say, oh, this is great, versus going, if I had to remove something, well, then I would remove this. Another question I like as well is, if you had to introduce me to somebody that you feel could help me build upon my ideas further, who would you introduce me to and why? And that's another great question that gives you more access to people's network that can give you better ideas for your presentation.
Have you heard what noted speakers and readers are saying about Peter's book, The Captivating Public Speaker? You can do no better than investing in Peter George's new book. Chapters are meticulously organized, and every topic is handled with in-depth detail. This book is the ultimate resource. After this episode, please use the link in the show notes to check out The Captivating Public Speaker on Amazon. Now back to Peter and his guest.
Do you think we take an online presentation as a lesser being?
I personally do, Peter, and I'm guilty as charged. I'm not going to sit here as a communication expert and say I take my online presentation just as seriously as my in-person ones. I'm wearing pajamas on this show with you, right? So there is a level of accountability that's hard even for the best in the world, but I'll still perform. So there's another piece that's important there to consider, which is, I believe the number one challenge in communication, a lot of people think it's fear in our industry. I actually think it's motivation, because there's so many things we've done in our life that we were scared of, but we pushed through it because we had a motivation to actually get the job done. So we need to apply that in the online setting too. Why does this presentation matter? Why is this important to the people around us? And when we have those answers to those questions, we're able to get the result we're looking for.
I work with a number of people who speak more than one language, and English is often a second language to them. What advice do you have for people who present in a second language?
Let me start from a place of empathy. The reason I'm able to give an answer to this is because I had that problem when I was younger. I grew up in Montreal, and as you know, it's a city where you need to know how to speak French. And I didn't know the language. So my whole life, not only did I struggle with communication, I had to present in a language I didn't even know. And that's where I struggled a lot to figure out how to give these presentations in French. And the answer is actually the same. So let's start the context. What is the difference between presenting in a first and a second language? In my opinion, it's two things: culture and vocabulary. So culture just means when we're immersed in the language we're speaking in, from a cultural perspective, we get a lot of the nuances that you wouldn't otherwise get. The other piece is vocabulary. Something that we know for sure is right in our first language, when we try to translate it into our second, it doesn't work as well. So here's my 3-part strategy on how to speak in a second language. Number 1 is to actually write your script in your first language, because you understand the culture and the vocabulary perfectly. The second step is to translate that script, whether it's in Mandarin, Hindi, Japanese, doesn't matter, into the language you need to speak it in, which is often going to be English in this case. So you write it out. And then the third piece that nobody does, that I encourage people to, is to do what I call a vocabulary test. Present that presentation to the native speakers of the language you need to present in, which in this case, let's say it's English. You present to people whose first language is English, and they can correct all the grammar, all the mistakes that you're making, so that you're perfect on stage. I did that with French, and that's why I'm able to keynote today in both English and French.
How much extra pressure do you think it puts on people when they're nervous about speaking in public to begin with, and now they have to think in that second language, and they're critiquing, if not criticizing, themselves for not being fluent?
I completely agree, and I get this a lot with the people I work with as well. And here's what I would say. The way that we cure this is by changing their mindset around it. So regardless of their ethnicity, let's say I'm coaching somebody who's Chinese. What I'll have them do is I'll have them look up someone who's really, really successful, who looks like them, who's exactly like them, and who has a accent, yet nobody cares. So for example, the person I use for the Chinese community is Jack Ma, right? The founder of Alibaba. So his English is actually really good for given that his first language is Mandarin, but he's not perfect, but nobody cares. So for the Indian community, I use like Sundar Pichai or something. But the point that I want to drive is there's always somebody in our lane who is way more successful than us, who's a great communicator where nobody cares about their accent. And that's when it helps us learn the idea that accent is just a mindset at the end of the day. And we just need to get better. As long as we feel good about ourselves when we're communicating, our audience won't feel those insecurities as long as we don't have them within ourselves.
Do you agree? And you're not as old as I am, so you don't have that experience of many years ago. But we're not caught up in accents as much as we used to be because of YouTube, because of television and movies, that we've become used to the various accents.
That's a really fascinating question, Peter. I agree in general with what you're saying because it's true. The world is becoming increasingly globalized. And I feel social media especially has made that spread a lot faster because of the rise of user-generated content. Now that any human being can create content and share ideas with people, it creates a nice mix of different ideas from different groups of people. And I definitely feel we've gotten used to it. And I feel that trend will definitely continue as the years go on.
Brenden, you've shared a lot of information. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure my listeners want to learn more about you. Where can they connect with you?
2 ways to keep in touch. The first one is the YouTube channel. Just go to Master Talk in one word, and you'll have access to hundreds of free videos on how to speak. And the second way to keep in touch is a free workshop I do on communication. I do one every 2 weeks over Zoom. That's live and interactive. And if you want to register for that, go to rockstarcommunicator.com.
Those will both be in the show notes. And I've been to Master Talk on YouTube. You do a great job on there. I highly recommend my listeners go there and check you out. Brenden, one word. What's the last word you have for us on public speaking?
I would say insanity.
Insanity. All right, we'll leave it at that. Brenden, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me on. This is great.
That's a wrap of another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George. Be sure to tune in again for a conversation with another public speaking expert. And remember to use the link in the show notes to go to Amazon and check out Peter's acclaimed book, The Captivating Public Speaker.